The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Hotel sparkled under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Marcus Rothenberg stood at the center of it all, a glass of champagne in his hand, surrounded by admirers who laughed at every word he spoke. At 42 years old, he had built an empire in real estate and technology that stretched across 3 continents. His tailored suit probably cost $10,000, and his watch could have fed a family for years. Tonight was his birthday celebration, and Marcus had invited everyone who mattered in New York City's elite circles. Business partners, politicians, celebrities, and socialites filled the room, all hoping to catch a moment of his attention. Marcus loved these gatherings. They reminded him of how far he had climbed from his modest beginnings in Brooklyn. "Marcus, you must be thinking about settling down soon," said Patricia Vanderbilt, a silver-haired society maven who had been trying to set him up with her daughter for months. "A man of your position needs a wife." Marcus laughed loudly, drawing the attention of the nearby guests. "A wife, Patricia? I've dated the most beautiful women in the world. Models, actresses, heiresses. None of them could hold my interest for more than a few months. I'm too particular, you see. Surely there must be someone who meets your standards," another guest chimed in. Marcus swelled his champagne and grinned. "You know what? I'll make this interesting. I'll tell you all exactly what it would take." He raised his voice so more people could hear. The conversations around him died down as guests turned to listen. "I'll get married," Marcus announced dramatically, "to any woman who can truly impress me. Any woman who can show me something I've never seen before, some talent or ability that genuinely surprises me." The crowd murmured with interest and amusement. Marcus was known for his bold statements and unusual challenges. "Be specific," Marcus called out his friend David from across the room. "What kind of talent?" Marcus walked over to the magnificent grand piano that sat in the corner of the ballroom. Placed there more for decoration than actual use, he rested his hand on its polished surface. "This piano," he said, with a theatrical flourish. "See this beautiful instrument? It cost me $200,000. It's a rare Steinway, one of the finest in the world. But here's the thing, I've never heard it played properly." Not once he turned to face his audience, his expression mocking and amused. "I'll make you all a promise, right here, right now. Any woman who can play this piano in a way that truly moves me, in a way that makes me feel something real, I'll marry her. No questions asked." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Someone shouted, "Marcus, you're safe. You have no heart to move." Marcus laughed along with them. "Perhaps you're right. But the offer stands. Play the piano in a way that impresses Marcus Rothenberg, and I'll put a ring on your finger." The guests found his challenge hilarious. Several women in the room could play piano, but they knew Marcus was joking. He was the man who had everything, who had seen everything, and who had grown bored with everything. The idea that a simple piano performance could change his mind about marriage was absurd. As the party continued, a few brave souls actually approached the piano. A socialite played a simplified version of a Mozart piece, hitting several wrong notes. Marcus clapped politely but made exaggerated yawning gestures that made everyone laugh. A young actress attempted a pop song, but her playing was mechanical and uninspired. "See," Marcus said to Patricia, "this is exactly what I mean. Adequate, mediocre, nothing that stirs the soul." Near the entrance to the ballroom, barely noticed by the wealthy crowd, stood Rachel Cohen. She had arrived late, wearing a simple black dress that looked elegant but certainly didn't come from a designer boutique. At 34, Rachel worked as a music teacher at a community center in Queens. She had been invited to the party by her cousin, who worked as an event coordinator and had gotten her name added to the guest list as a favor. Rachel had almost not come. She didn't belong in this world of excessive wealth and casual arrogance. But her cousin had insisted, saying it would be good for her to get out, to see something different from her usual routine of teaching children from immigrant families and struggling to pay her rent. She had arrived just in time to hear Marcus's mocking challenge. As she watched him laugh at the women who tried to play his expensive piano, something stirred inside her. It wasn't anger, exactly, though she certainly didn't like his attitude. It was something else. A memory. Rachel's grandmother, Sarah Cohen, had been a concert pianist in Poland before World War II. She had played in the finest halls of Warsaw and Vienna, had studied under masters, had been on the verge of international fame. Then the war had come, and Sarah had lost everything. Her family, her home, her career, and nearly her life. Sarah had survived the concentration camps, though barely. When she finally made it to America, her hands had been damaged, her spirit broken. She never performed publicly again. But she had taught Rachel everything she knew about music, about feeling, about pouring your soul into sound. Music isn't about perfection, her grandmother had told her countless times. It's about truth. It's about taking everything inside you, the joy, the pain, the love, the loss, and letting it flow through your fingers into the keys. Rachel moved quietly through the crowd, getting closer to the piano. She could see it was indeed a beautiful instrument, probably rarely played, kept mostly for show. She thought about her grandmother, about her students, about everyone who had ever truly needed music to survive, to express what words couldn't say. Marcus was still holding court near the piano, telling some story about a business deal, when Rachel stepped forward. Her cousin saw her moving toward the front and tried to catch her arm, to pull her back, but Rachel gently shook her off. She didn't wait for an introduction or permission. She simply walked up to the piano bench and sat down. The conversations around the piano didn't stop immediately. Marcus was mid-sentence when he noticed a woman he didn't recognize sitting at his piano. She wasn't dressed like his usual guests. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and her black dress, while elegant, was clearly off the rack from some department store. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his tone mixing amusement and irritation. "Can I help you?" Rachel looked up at him. Her brown eyes were calm, steady. "You made an offer," she said simply. "I'm taking you up on it." The guests nearby started to laugh, thinking this was part of the evening's entertainment. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was used to people doing outrageous things to get his attention, especially women hoping to catch his interest. "I see," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "And you think you can play this piano in a way that will impress me? Do you know how many accomplished musicians have played for me over the years?" "I don't care about other musicians," Rachel replied, adjusting the bench slightly. "I'm not here to impress you with technique or training." Marcus laughed, and several guests joined in. "Oh, then what exactly are you here to do?" Rachel's fingers touched the keys gently, testing them. "I'm here to remind you what music actually is." The laughter grew louder. Marcus turned to his audience, spreading his hands in a gesture that said, "Can you believe this woman?" But he was curious now, despite himself. There was something in her voice, a quiet confidence that was different from the nervous showing off he'd seen earlier. "Very well," he said with exaggerated courtesy, gesturing to the piano. "By all means, remind me. This should be entertaining." Rachel took a deep breath. She closed her eyes for a moment, and in that silence, she thought of her grandmother. She thought of the stories Sarah had told her about playing in the great halls of Europe, about the music that had sustained her through the darkest times, about the language that transcended words and spoke directly to the human heart. When Rachel's fingers touched the keys, the room didn't immediately go quiet. People were still talking, still laughing at Marcus's jokes. But, within the first few measures, something began to change. She didn't play anything famous or showy. She played a piece her grandmother had composed. A melody that had never been written down, only passed from Sarah's heart to Rachel's through years of teaching and practice. It started simply, almost like a lullaby, sweet and gentle. One by one, the conversations began to fade. People turned toward the piano, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. The melody was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was a depth to the playing, an emotion that seemed to come from somewhere beyond technique. Rachel's hands moved across the keys with absolute confidence. Not the flashy confidence of a show-off, but the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what she wanted to say. The simple melody grew more complex, developing themes that interweaved like conversations, like memories overlapping. The music began to tell a story. There was joy in it, the bright, clear notes of a life filled with promise. Then, gradually, shadows crept in. Minor chords, hesitations, a sense of something precious being threatened. The melody fought against the darkness, struggling, reaching for the light that seemed to slip further away. Marcus had started to turn back to his conversation, ready to dismiss this unknown woman with a witty comment. But something made him stop. He found himself actually listening. The music was getting inside him, past all his defenses, past his cynicism, and his carefully cultivated indifference. The piece moved into its darkest section. The notes became sparse, haunting. They spoke of loss, of grief, of a world shattered. Rachel's whole body seemed to feel each note, her shoulders curving over the keys, her expression distant, as if she were somewhere else entirely. Several women in the audience felt tears forming in their eyes, though they couldn't have explained why. The men shifted uncomfortably, moved by something they weren't used to feeling. Even the waiters stopped moving, held in place by the spell of the music. Then, slowly, painfully, the melody began to rebuild itself. Hope emerged, fragile at first, just small glimmers in the darkness. The notes climbed higher, finding strength. This wasn't the innocent joy of the beginning. This was something harder one, something forged in pain and loss. The music spoke of survival, of choosing to go on, of finding beauty even after everything beautiful had been destroyed. The final section built to a powerful crescendo, both hands working in harmony, all the themes coming together. It was triumphant, but not in a simple way. It was triumph, mixed with sorrow, joy, intertwined with memory. It was the sound of a human soul that had been broken and put itself back together, changed, but undefeated. Rachel's hands lifted from the keys, and the final notes hung in the air of the silent ballroom. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence stretched out, heavy with emotion. Marcus stood completely still, his champagne glass forgotten in his hand. Something had happened to him while listening to that music, something he hadn't experienced in years. He had felt something real. For those few minutes, all his money, all his success, all his carefully built walls had meant nothing. He had been just a human being, listening to another human being speak through music, and he had understood every word. His throat felt tight. His chest ached. He realized with shock that his eyes were actually wet with unshed tears. Marcus Rothenberg, who prided himself on his emotional control, who hadn't cried since he was a teenager, was on the verge of crying in front of 200 people. Rachel opened her eyes and looked at him. She didn't look triumphant or smug. She looked tired, as if the performance had taken everything she had. That, she said quietly, was my grandmother's story. Sarah Cohen. She was a concert pianist in Poland. The Nazis took everything from her. Her family, her career, her life. But they couldn't take the music from inside her. She survived, and she taught me that music isn't about impressing anyone. It's about truth. The ballroom remained silent. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone began to clap. Then another person, and another. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Not the polite society applause they'd given earlier, but real appreciation, genuine emotion. Marcus couldn't clap. He couldn't move. He just stood there, staring at this woman who had walked into his carefully controlled world and shattered something inside him. Something he hadn't even known was still capable of breaking. Rachel stood up from the piano bench, smoothing her simple dress. She looked at Marcus one more time, her expression unreadable. "I didn't come here to marry you," she said, her voice clear in the applauding crowd. "I came here because someone needed to show you that real value isn't something you can buy." She turned to walk away, and that movement, the sight of her leaving, broke Marcus's paralysis. "Wait," Marcus called out, his voice rougher than usual. The single word cut through the applause, and the room fell silent again. Everyone turned to look at him, sensing that something significant was happening. Rachel stopped, but didn't turn around immediately. She stood with her back to him, her shoulders straight, waiting. Marcus struggled to find words. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, who negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, who always knew exactly what to say. But right now, his mind was blank. All he knew was that he couldn't let her walk away. "I made a promise," he finally said. "In front of all these witnesses, I said any woman who could truly move me with that piano, I would marry." Rachel turned slowly. Her expression was skeptical. "You weren't serious. That was just a game, showing off for your friends." "Maybe it started that way," Marcus admitted, and the honesty in his voice surprised everyone, including himself. "But you did it? You actually did it. You made me feel." He trailed off, unable to finish. "Feel what?" Rachel asked, her voice challenging, uncomfortable, exposed. "Human for 5 minutes." A few guests gasped at her boldness. No one spoke to Marcus Rothenberg that way. But Marcus didn't look angry. He looked lost. "Yes," he said simply. "All of those things." Rachel studied him for a long moment. "I don't want your money. I don't want your name. I don't want to be another possession in your collection." "Then what do you want?" Marcus asked. "I want to go home," Rachel said. "I want to go back to my life, to my students, to work that actually matters. I came here tonight because my cousin insisted. I sat at that piano because your arrogance offended me. And I wanted to show you that there are things in this world that matter more than money. But I'm not interested in being your wife or your prize or whatever fantasy you've built up in the last 5 minutes." She started walking toward the door again. Marcus's friend David grabbed his arm. "Let her go, Marcus. She's right." "You don't even know her." But Marcus pulled free. He crossed the ballroom in quick strides, catching up to Rachel near the entrance. "You're right," he said, matching her pace. "I don't know you. And you're right, that I was arrogant. I've been arrogant for years. But what you just did, what you made me feel with that music, it was real. For the first time in longer than I can remember, something was real." Rachel stopped in the hotel corridor, away from the curious eyes of the party guests. "Mr. Rothenberg, I don't know what kind of fairy tale you think this is, but people don't fall in love in 5 minutes. And people certainly don't get married because of a piano performance." "I'm not talking about love," Marcus said, though even as he said it, he wasn't sure that was true. "I'm talking about ... connection, understanding. You showed me something tonight that I've been missing. I've spent years collecting things, building things, surrounding myself with beauty and luxury, and all of it's been empty. I didn't even realize how empty until you played that music." Rachel's expression softened slightly. "So you had an emotional moment. That's good. Maybe you needed it, but that doesn't mean we should get married." "Give me a chance," Marcus said. "Not to marry you right away, that would be crazy. But give me a chance to know you. To understand what you showed me tonight." "Why?" Rachel asked. "Why would I do that? You live in a completely different world than I do. We have nothing in common." "We have music," Marcus said. "We have that moment in there, when you made a room full of jaded, wealthy people actually feel something." Rachel shook her head, but she was smiling now, just a little. "You're persistent." "I'm a businessman," Marcus said. "When I see value, I pursue it. And you, Rachel Cohen, have more genuine value than anything in that ballroom, including me." "That's the first humble thing I've heard you say all night," Rachel observed. "Let me buy you coffee," Marcus said. "Just coffee. Tomorrow, somewhere normal, somewhere in your world, instead of mine. Let me apologize properly for my behavior tonight. Let me hear more about your grandmother, about your music, about your life." Rachel studied him carefully. She saw past the expensive suit and the polished charm. She saw someone who had been genuinely moved, genuinely changed by what had happened. She also saw someone who might revert to his old self by tomorrow morning. "One coffee," she finally agreed, "but not because of your promise or your challenge. If I agree to see you again, it's because I choose to, not because you made some public declaration." "Fair enough," Marcus said. He pulled out his phone. "What's your number?" Rachel hesitated, then gave it to him. "There's a cafe in Queens, near where I teach. Morningside coffee. 10 o'clock tomorrow." "I'll be there," Marcus promised. "Come alone," Rachel added. "No driver, no assistant, no bodyguard. Just you." Marcus nodded. Just me. Rachel turned to leave, then paused. And Mr. Rothenberg? That piano of yours? It's beautiful, but it's not being used properly. Music isn't meant to sit in a corner as decoration. It's meant to be played, to be shared. If you really want to honor what happened tonight, find someone to play it regularly. Let it fulfill its purpose. With that, she walked out of the Waldorf Hotel, leaving Marcus standing in the corridor, his mind racing with thoughts he'd never had before. When he returned to the ballroom, his guests surrounded him with questions. Who was she? Was he really going to marry her? Was the challenge legitimate? Marcus held up his hands for quiet. The party's over, he announced. Thank you all for coming, but I need some time to think. There were protests and questions, but Marcus was firm. Within an hour, the ballroom was empty except for Marcus and the event staff cleaning up. He sat at the piano, touching the keys Rachel had touched, trying to understand what had happened to him. Patricia Vanderbilt had lingered, and she approached him now. Marcus, dear, you can't be serious about this. That woman is nobody. She has nothing. Marcus looked at her, and Patricia was startled by the look in his eyes. She has everything, he said quietly. Everything I've been missing. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He lay in his penthouse apartment, looking at the ceiling, replaying the music in his mind. He had recorded the entire party on security cameras, as he always did for his events. At 3 a.m, he pulled up the footage and watched Rachel's performance again. Seeing it from a distance, watching his own face as he listened, was even more powerful. He could see the exact moment when his expression changed, when the music broke through his defenses. He looked vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be in decades. He thought about his life, the companies he'd built, the deals he'd made, the wealth he'd accumulated. All of it had been in service of proving something, of showing the world that the poor kid from Brooklyn could become someone important. But in the process, he'd lost touch with a part of himself that could be moved by something as simple and profound as honest music. Rachel had called him arrogant, and she was right. He had been insufferable tonight, making that ridiculous challenge, treating marriage like it was just another business transaction. But her music had cracked something open inside him, some long-sealed chamber of his heart, and he couldn't close it again, even if he wanted to. As morning light began to filter through his floor-to-ceiling windows, Marcus made a decision. He was going to that coffee shop in Queens. And he was going to be honest with Rachel in a way he hadn't been honest with anyone in years, including himself. Marcus arrived at Morningside Coffee at exactly 10 o'clock. He had followed Rachel's instructions and came alone, taking the subway for the first time in years. The experience had been jarring. He'd forgotten what it was like to be surrounded by ordinary people, living ordinary lives. Rushing to work, reading newspapers, listening to music on cheap headphones. The cafe was nothing like the places he usually frequented. It was small and crowded, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in local art for sale. The coffee probably cost $3 instead of $8. Marcus felt completely out of place in his casual clothes, which still somehow looked expensive. Rachel was already there, sitting at a corner table with a book open in front of her. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up when he entered, and he saw surprise flicker across her face. "You actually came," she said as he approached. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Marcus asked, sitting down across from her. "Honestly, I thought you'd wake up this morning and realize last night was just a moment of weakness. I figured you'd send your assistant to make some excuse." Marcus smiled ruefully. "I don't have any excuses. And last night wasn't weakness. It was the first real thing I've felt in a very long time." A waitress came over, a young woman with a Brooklyn accent who clearly didn't recognize Marcus. He ordered a regular coffee, black. When she left, Rachel closed her book. "Tell me about yourself," Marcus said. "Not just about the music, everything." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That's a big question for a first coffee date." "Is this a date?" Marcus asked. "You tell me," Rachel countered. "You're the one who chased me down last night." Marcus took a breath. "I've been thinking about what happened. About your music, about what you said. You're right that I was showing off, that I was arrogant. But you're wrong about one thing. What's that? You said, I don't know what love is, what real connection is. And maybe you're right. But I know what absence feels like. I've felt that for years and just covered it up with work and money and distractions. Your music made me feel that absence like a physical pain. Rachel was quiet for a moment. That's honest, she finally said, more honest than I expected. I'm tired of being dishonest, Marcus said. I'm tired of pretending everything in my life is perfect when it's really just expensive. The waitress brought their coffee. Rachel wrapped her hands around her cup, thinking, my grandmother used to say that music reveals truth, she said. She said you can't lie when you play from the heart. Every emotion, every experience, it all comes through in the notes. That's what I was playing last night. Her truth, her story, her survival. Tell me about her, Marcus said. Please. So Rachel did. She told him about Sarah Cohen, who had been born in Warsaw in 1920. She described how Sarah had shown musical talent from an early age, how she'd studied at the finest conservatories, how she'd been on the verge of international fame when the war began. She was engaged to be married, Rachel said softly. His name was David. He was a violinist. They were supposed to perform together, to travel the world. They had their whole lives planned out. What happened to him? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. He died in the camps. Along with her parents, her two sisters, most of her friends. Sarah survived because a Nazi officer had heard her play once before the war. He kept her alive to play for him and his guests. Can you imagine? Playing beautiful music for the people who murdered your family? Marcus felt his chest tighten. How did she survive that? She told me she went somewhere else in her mind when she played. She played for David, for her family, for everyone who had been lost. She made the music a memorial. The Nazis thought she was playing for them, but she was really playing for the dead. And after the war, she came to America with nothing. Her hands had been injured during her imprisonment. She couldn't play professionally anymore, not at the level she'd achieved before. So she taught. She taught immigrant children, refugees, anyone who wanted to learn. She said music had saved her life, so she would use it to give life to others. Marcus listened, his coffee growing cold. And she taught you. She taught me everything. Not just how to play, but why to play. She died 5 years ago, but I hear her voice every time I sit at a piano. That piece I played last night. She composed it after she came to America. It was her way of processing everything that happened. She never wrote it down. She said some music was too personal for paper. And you remember it perfectly, Marcus observed. Every note, Rachel confirmed. It's my inheritance. Not money or possessions, but memory and music. Marcus looked at her with something close to awe. You come from such richness, and I don't mean money. You come from meaning and purpose and survival, and I've spent my whole life accumulating things that mean nothing. That's not entirely true, Rachel said. You built businesses. You created jobs. You accomplished things. I built buildings and businesses because I wanted to prove I was worth something, Marcus said. I wanted to show everyone who doubted me, everyone who looked down on the poor kid from Brooklyn, that I could be more successful than all of them. It was all about ego. And now? Rachel asked. Now I'm wondering what the point was. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I have properties I've never visited. I have possessions that sit in storage. And last night, a woman I'd never met played a piano and showed me that none of it matters. Rachel smiled. I didn't mean to have an existential crisis. Maybe I needed one, Marcus said. He reached across the table, then hesitated. May I? Rachel looked at his outstretched hand, then placed her hand in his. His hand was smooth, manicured. Hers had calluses from years of playing piano. I don't know what this is, Marcus said. I don't know if it's love or fascination, or just the shock of feeling something real. But I know I want to see you again. I want to understand your world. I want to learn what my grandmother knew. Your grandmother? Rachel asked, confused. Marcus smiled sadly. I had a grandmother too. Her name was Ruth. She came from Poland also, actually. She came here with nothing, and worked in a garment factory her whole life. She used to sing while she worked. Yiddish songs, Polish songs, songs I never learned the words to. She tried to teach me, but I was too busy trying to be American, trying to fit in, trying to be someone different than a poor immigrant's grandson. She's gone now. Rachel asked gently. 20 years ago. I barely made it to her funeral because I had an important business meeting. Marcus's voice was heavy with regret. I chose work over saying goodbye properly. I've been making that kind of choice my whole adult life. Rachel squeezed his hand. It's not too late to make different choices. Is that what this is? A different choice? Maybe, Rachel said. But you need to understand something. If you want to see me again, it has to be real. I'm not interested in being a project, or a phase, or a way for you to feel better about yourself. My life isn't going to change. I'm still going to teach music to children in Queens. I'm still going to struggle to pay my rent sometimes. I'm still going to be exactly who I am. I don't want you to change, Marcus said. I want to change. Or maybe remember. Remember what matters. They talked for 3 hours in that little cafe. Marcus told her about his childhood. About growing up in a cramped apartment with his mother and grandmother after his father left. He told her about being hungry sometimes, about wearing second-hand clothes, about the shame he'd felt and the anger that had driven him to succeed. Rachel shared more stories about her grandmother, about her students, about the immigrant families she worked with who reminded her so much of Sarah's stories. She told him about the struggles of being a music teacher in underfunded community centers. About watching talented children give up their dreams because they couldn't afford instruments or lessons. Over the next 3 months, Marcus and Rachel's relationship developed in ways neither of them expected. Marcus kept his promise to enter her world. He started taking the subway regularly, meeting her at neighborhood cafes and restaurants. He attended one of her student recitals at the community center. Sitting in a folding chair in a room that smelled of old books and floor polish. The recital changed something in him. He watched children from a dozen different countries, some who barely spoke English, communicate through music. A 7-year-old girl from Syria played a simple folk melody with such concentration that the whole room held its breath. A teenage boy from Honduras played a piece he'd composed himself, pouring his homesickness into every note. After the recital, Marcus met some of Rachel's students and their families. They had no idea who he was, just thought he was Rachel's boyfriend. He helped fold up chairs and stack music stands. He ate homemade tamales that a student's mother had brought. For the first time in years, he felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with signing checks or closing deals. You were really good with the kids today, Rachel told him as they walked through her neighborhood afterward. They're amazing, Marcus said. That girl, Amira, the one from Syria. She's incredibly talented. She is, Rachel agreed, but her family can't afford to buy her a piano. She practices on a keyboard at the center, but it's not the same. Marcus was quiet for a moment. How much does a piano cost? A decent one for a child learning. Rachel gave him a look. What? Don't try to solve everything with money. That's your old habit showing. Marcus stopped walking. Rachel, I have more money than I know what to do with. If I can help a talented child have a piano, why shouldn't I? Because then you become the rich savior, and they become the charity cases. It changes the relationship. It makes it about you and your generosity instead of about their hard work and talent. I don't want to be the savior, Marcus protested. I just want to help. I know, Rachel said, her voice softening, and that's why I'm not saying no. I'm just saying, think about how you help. Make it about them, not about you. This became a recurring theme in their relationship. Marcus wanted to fix everything, to write checks and make phone calls and use his connections. Rachel kept pulling him back, teaching him that sometimes the best help was quiet and invisible. That real change took time and relationship, not just money. But slowly, Marcus began to understand. He started volunteering at the community center. Not as Marcus Rothenberg, the billionaire, but just as Marcus, another adult who could help move equipment, or listen to a child practice scales. He set up an anonymous fund through the center that provided instruments and lesson assistance, but insisted his name never be attached to it. Meanwhile, Rachel was learning that Marcus's wealth wasn't who he was, just what he had. She saw him genuinely struggle to unlearn decades of habits, to stop leading with money and status. She watched him be humble, be wrong, be willing to change. She also saw him with his guard down. One evening, they were at his penthouse, and she convinced him to play a record from his grandmother's era. When the Yiddish song began, Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I'd forgotten," he whispered. "I'd completely forgotten she used to sing this." Rachel held him while he cried. Really cried, for the first time since he was a child. He mourned his grandmother, his lost connection to his heritage. All the years he'd spent running away from where he came from. "I was so ashamed," he told Rachel. "Ashamed of being poor, of being an immigrant's grandson. I wanted to be someone completely different." "You can't be someone different," Rachel said gently. "You can only be a better version of who you are." Their relationship wasn't without challenges. Marcus's friends and business associates didn't understand what he saw in Rachel. At a charity gala, he convinced her to attend. She overheard Patricia Vanderbilt telling someone, "She's clearly after his money. Why else would someone like her be with someone like him?" Rachel had confronted Marcus about it afterward. "Do you think that?" "That I'm after your money?" "No," Marcus said, without hesitation. "You've never asked me for anything? You won't even let me pay for dinner half the time. But other people think it. Your whole world thinks it." Marcus took her hands. "Then maybe it's not my world anymore. Maybe I need a new world." That conversation led to a bigger one. They were 6 months into their relationship, and neither of them had said the word love yet, though it hung in the air between them constantly. "What are we doing?" Rachel asked one night as they sat on the roof of her apartment building, looking at the city lights. "Where is this going?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. "I know where I want it to go," he finally said. "Your promise." "The challenge." "No," Marcus said. "That was stupid. That was the old me. The one who thought everything could be a transaction or a game. This is different. You're different. What I feel is different." "What do you feel?" Rachel asked. Marcus turned to face her fully. "I love you. I love how you see the world. I love your commitment to your students. I love how you challenge me to be better. I love that you see past all the money and status to who I actually am. I love that you knew your grandmother's music by heart and trusted me enough to share it. I love you, Rachel." Rachel felt tears on her cheeks. "I love you too. But I'm scared of what? Of how different we are. Of what happens when the novelty wears off and you realize I can't fit into your world. Of you getting bored with playing in my small life and going back to your big one." "My life wasn't big," Marcus said. "It was empty. It was small in all the ways that matter. You've made it bigger. You've made me bigger." "Pretty words," Rachel said, but she was smiling through her tears. "Not just words," Marcus insisted. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Rachel's breath caught. "Wait," she said. "Marcus, we've only been together 6 months." "I know. And I'm not asking you to marry me right now, but I want you to know I'm serious. I want you to know this isn't a phase or a game. When I'm ready to ask, really ask, this is what I'll use." He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, elegant but not ostentatious. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "The only thing of hers I kept. I want you to have it, whether you marry me or not. I want you to have something that connects you to where I came from, to remember that I'm trying to find my way back to what matters." Rachel looked at the ring, then at Marcus's face. She saw vulnerability there, hope, fear. She saw the man he was becoming, still flawed, still learning, but genuinely trying. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said. "Not with the ring. Just ask me. Ask me when we've lived more life together. When we've fought and made up. When we've seen each other at our worst as well as our best. And if I ask in 6 months." Rachel smiled. "Ask me and find out." They kissed under the city lights, to people from different worlds building a bridge between them. One honest conversation at a time. The ring stayed in its box, a promise and a possibility, waiting for the right moment. The 6 months that followed tested their relationship in ways neither had anticipated. Marcus had assumed that once he'd opened his heart to Rachel, everything would be simple. He was wrong. The first real fight came when Marcus tried to surprise Rachel by buying the building where her community center was located. The center had been facing eviction because the landlord wanted to sell to a developer. Marcus bought the building anonymously and planned to let the center stay rent-free. Rachel found out by accident when the center's director mentioned the mysterious benefactor. She immediately knew it was Marcus. "How could you do that without talking to me first?" she demanded when she confronted him at his office. Marcus was genuinely confused. "I saved your center. I thought you'd be happy." "You don't understand," Rachel said, her frustration evident. "This isn't about you swooping in to save the day. Those people have been fighting for their space, organizing, fundraising, building community support. You just took away their agency, their struggle." "Their struggle?" "Rachel, they were going to lose their building, and they might have lost it and found another way. Or they might have won through their own efforts. Either way, it would have been theirs. Now, it's yours. Now they owe you." Marcus sat back, stung. "I don't want them to owe me anything, but they do, whether you want them to or not. Every time they use that building now, they'll know some rich man owns it and is letting them stay out of charity. It changes everything." They didn't speak for 3 days after that fight. Marcus was hurt and confused. He'd thought he was doing something good, something generous. Rachel was angry because he still didn't understand that real help wasn't about grand gestures, but about empowering people to help themselves. Finally, Rachel called him. "Come to the center tomorrow night. There's someone I want you to meet." When Marcus arrived, Rachel introduced him to Maria, a woman in her 50s who ran the center's adult literacy program. Maria had come to America 15 years ago and had worked 3 jobs while learning English and getting her teaching certification. "Maria," Rachel said, "tell Marcus about the building campaign." Maria explained how they'd been organizing, how they'd gotten local businesses to donate, how they'd been planning a fundraiser and working with legal aid to negotiate with the landlord. "We had a plan," Maria said. "We were going to fight. And maybe we would have lost, but we would have fought together. That matters." Marcus listened, really listened. When Maria finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I messed up. I'm sorry." Over the next week, Marcus worked with the center's leadership to restructure the situation. He transferred the building into a community trust, with the center's board in control. He provided funding but structured it as a loan at 0 interest, which they could pay back or convert to equity by increasing community ownership. It was complicated and took lawyers days to work out, but in the end, the center was truly community. "That was hard for you," Rachel observed afterward, "giving up control." "Everything about being with you is hard," Marcus admitted. "But it's good hard. It's growing hard." The second major challenge came from Rachel's world. One of her colleagues at the community center, David, had been quietly interested in Rachel for years. When he realized her relationship with Marcus was serious, he made his feelings known. "You're making a mistake," David told Rachel one day when Marcus wasn't around. "You think he's changed, but rich people don't change. Eventually, he'll want you to be someone you're not. He'll want you to fit into his world." "That's not fair," Rachel said. "You don't know him." "I know his type," David insisted. "I've seen it before. Wealthy guy wants to feel good about himself, dates someone from our world, then gets bored and moves on. You're a project to him, Rachel." The words bothered Rachel more than she wanted to admit. She found herself watching Marcus more carefully, looking for signs that David was right. Was Marcus really changing, or was he just playing a role? Would he eventually get tired of community centers and simple cafes? Her doubts came to a head at a family wedding Marcus had to attend. It was for his cousin, someone from his wealthy social circle. Rachel agreed to go with him, but she dreaded it. The wedding was exactly what she feared. It was at an exclusive country club, with a guest list full of people who looked at her simple dress with barely concealed disdain. People asked what she did for a living, and when she said she taught music, they lost interest immediately. They wanted to talk about investments and vacation homes and people Rachel had never heard of. Marcus tried to stay by her side, but he kept getting pulled into conversations. Rachel watched him slip back into his old persona, the confident businessman who spoke the language of wealth and power. He laughed at jokes that weren't funny. He talked about deals and acquisitions. He seemed completely at home in this world. During dinner, Rachel sat next to Marcus's cousin's wife, a woman named Jennifer, who had clearly had several glasses of champagne. "You know, it's very sweet," Jennifer said to Rachel. "Marcus, dating someone like you? Very pretty woman, but between us girls, don't you think it's a bit unfair? You must know it can't last. He needs someone who understands his world." Rachel excused herself and found a quiet corner of the country club. She was seriously considering calling a cab and leaving when Marcus found her. "What's wrong?" he asked. "This," Rachel said, gesturing to the lavish surroundings. "All of this." David was right. "I don't belong here." "I never will, David." "Your colleague David." "What does he have to do with this?" Rachel told him about the conversation, about David's warnings, about Jennifer's comments. "Everyone thinks I'm a charity case or a phase you're going through," she finished. Marcus's jaw tightened. "What does it matter what they think? It matters because they're your people. This is your world, and I watched you tonight, Marcus. You fit right in. You know how to be this person. Maybe that's who you really are." "No," Marcus said firmly. "That's who I was." "There's a difference, is there? Because you seemed pretty comfortable." Marcus took a deep breath. "You're right. I did slip into old patterns. It's easy to do when you're surrounded by people who expect it. But that doesn't mean I want this life." "Do you know what I was thinking during that entire dinner?" "What?" "I was thinking about how much I'd rather be at your student recital. How much more real that felt than any of this." He gestured at the elegant ballroom. "I was thinking about how these people talk about money and possessions while your students talk about dreams and survival. I was thinking about how bored I am with all of this." "Then why did we come?" "Because it's my cousin's wedding, and I love her despite her questionable taste in friends. Because sometimes we have to show up for family, even when it's uncomfortable. But Rachel, just because I can function in this world, doesn't mean I want to live in it anymore." Rachel looked at him searchingly. "How do I know you mean that? How do I know you won't wake up one day and realize you miss all this?" Marcus thought about it seriously. "You don't know. I don't even know for certain. But I know how I feel when I'm with you versus how I feel here. I know that the person I am with you is who I want to be. I know that teaching kids piano and volunteering at the community center makes me happier than any business deal ever did." "But what if it's not enough?" Rachel asked, her voice small. "What if someday you resent me for pulling you away from all this?" "Rachel, I was drowning in all this. You didn't pull me away. You threw me a lifeline." He took her hands. "But I understand if you're having doubts. This isn't easy. We're from different worlds, and that creates complications. If you need time, if you need space to figure out what you want, I'll give it to you." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, looking at their joined hands. Then she squeezed his fingers. "I don't need space. I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll tell me the truth. If you start feeling trapped, or bored, or like you made a mistake, promise me you'll say so instead of pretending. I'd rather have an honest ending than a comfortable lie." "I promise," Marcus said. "But Rachel, I don't think that's going to happen. I think I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You don't have to be worthy," Rachel said. "You just have to be honest." They left the wedding early, Marcus not caring what anyone thought. On the drive back to the city, they talked about the future more seriously than they ever had. They talked about what their life together might actually look like, the compromises they'd both need to make, the challenges they'd face. The final section of their story began exactly 1 year after the night they met. Marcus had kept his promise to Rachel. He hadn't proposed, hadn't pushed, had simply been present in her life and let their relationship develop naturally. But he'd been planning something special for their anniversary. Not something extravagant or expensive, but something meaningful. On that evening, Marcus asked Rachel to meet him at the Waldorf Hotel. She was skeptical when he told her, "Marcus, I don't want to go back there. That whole night was about your ego and showing off." "Please," he said, "trust me. This is different." Reluctantly, Rachel agreed. When she arrived at the hotel, Marcus was waiting for her outside the ballroom. But when the doors opened, Rachel gasped. The ballroom had been completely transformed. Instead of elegant tables and wealthy guests, it was filled with children. Rachel's students from the community center, along with dozens of other children from music programs across the city. The expensive Steinway piano sat in the center, but now it was surrounded by music stands, folding chairs, and young faces. "What is this?" Rachel asked, her voice breaking. "This is what you taught me," Marcus said. "That expensive things have no value if they're not being used for their purpose. So I rented this ballroom for the night, and I invited every child music student I could find. The piano is going to be played. Really played. The way it should be." Rachel looked around at the children, many of whom recognized her and were waving excitedly. She saw Amira, the Syrian girl, her eyes wide with wonder at the grand room. "There's more," Marcus said. He led her to a table where stacks of papers were laid out. "I've been working with several community music programs. I've set up a foundation, but this time I did it right. I consulted with teachers and program directors. The board is made up entirely of music educators and community organizers. I'm just the funding source. The decisions are made by people who actually know what they're doing." Rachel picked up one of the papers. It was the incorporation documents for the Sarah Cohen Music Foundation. She looked at Marcus with tears in her eyes. "You named it after my grandmother. She was the one who really taught me about music. Through you, through her story. It seemed right." Before Rachel could respond, the doors opened again and more people filed in. Rachel recognized many faces from the community center, from her students' families, from the neighborhood, and then she saw some faces that surprised her. Marcus's cousin, the one who'd gotten married, his friend David from the first night they met. Even Patricia Vanderbilt was there, though she looked slightly uncomfortable. "What's happening?" Rachel asked. Marcus took her hand and led her to the center of the room, near the piano. Everyone gathered around, and suddenly Rachel understood. This was the moment. Marcus knelt down on one knee, and the room went completely silent. Even the children stopped fidgeting. "Rachel Cohen," Marcus began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "1 year ago, I stood in this room and made a stupid, arrogant promise. I said I'd marry any woman who could play this piano and move me. It was a joke, a game. I didn't believe in love, or connection, or anything beyond what I could see, and touch, and buy." He pulled out the small box with his grandmother's ring. "But you sat at that piano, and you broke something open inside me. You showed me what I'd been missing. Not just love, though that came later, but purpose, connection, truth. You showed me that real value can't be bought." Rachel was crying now, and she didn't care who saw. "This past year, you've taught me more than how to love. You've taught me how to live, how to be present, how to give without expecting anything back, how to value people over possessions. You've been patient with me when I screwed up, and you've been honest with me when I needed to hear hard truths." Marcus opened the box, and the simple ring caught the light. "I'm not asking you to marry me because of a promise I made a year ago. I'm asking because I can't imagine my life without you. I'm asking because you make me want to be better than I am. I'm asking because I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone." He took a breath. "Rachel Cohen, will you marry me?" The room was so quiet, you could hear people breathing. Rachel looked at Marcus, at the ring, at the room full of children and neighbors and the strange mix of both their worlds coming together. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Children jumped up and down. Rachel's students rushed forward to hug her. Marcus stood up and slipped the ring on her finger. And when they kissed, the whole room cheered again. Later, after the ring was on her finger and the initial excitement had died down, the evening turned into an impromptu concert. The children took turns playing the expensive Steinway. Some played simple scales, some played complicated pieces, some just banged on the keys experimentally, learning the feel of a real piano. Amira played her Syrian folk melody, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Marcus's cousin surprised everyone by singing along to one of the pieces, revealing a beautiful voice Rachel hadn't expected. Even Patricia Vanderbilt admitted that she'd taken piano lessons as a child and played a rusty but charming version of a Chopin nocturne. As the evening wound down and families started to leave, thanking Marcus and Rachel for the magical night, Rachel and Marcus found themselves alone at the piano. Marcus sat on one side of the bench, Rachel on the other. "Play it again," Marcus asked softly. "Your grandmother's piece." Rachel placed her hands on the keys and began to play. This time, though, the melody was different. It still had all the pain and loss of the original, all the struggle and survival. But now, there was something new woven through it. There was hope. There was joy. There was love. As she played, Marcus listened the way he had that first night. But this time, instead of breaking him open, the music filled him up. It filled all the empty spaces he'd been carrying for years. When the last notes faded, they sat in silence for a moment. "Your grandmother survived impossible things," Marcus said. "She lost everything and built a new life. She taught you that music could save you, that beauty could survive even horror." "She did," Rachel agreed. "I think about what she would say," Marcus continued. "About us. About you marrying someone so different from your world." Rachel smiled. "She would say that love is love, and everything else is just details. She would say that a person who's willing to learn is more valuable than a person who already knows everything. She would say that you honor her by trying to be better." "I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying," Marcus promised. They married 3 months later, not in a grand ceremony at the Waldorf, but in Rachel's grandmother's old synagogue in Queens. It was a small wedding, intimate and meaningful. Marcus's wealthy friends mixed awkwardly with Rachel's students and their families. But by the end of the night, barriers had broken down. Children taught business executives traditional dances. Immigrants shared their stories with people who'd never left the country. Music, as always, bridged the gaps. When it came time for the first dance, instead of a DJ or a band, Amira played the piano. She played a piece she'd composed herself, a blend of her Syrian heritage and her American present. It was beautiful and full of hope. As Marcus and Rachel danced, he whispered in her ear, "Thank you." "For what?" Rachel asked. "For playing that piano a year ago. For teaching me what matters. For loving me even when I didn't deserve it." Rachel pulled back to look at him. "You did deserve it. You just didn't know it yet." Years later, people would talk about Marcus Rothenberg's transformation, how the ruthless businessman became a philanthropist, focused on music education and immigrant services, how he'd simplified his life, sold most of his properties, and focused on meaningful work, how he and his wife had started a foundation that had helped thousands of children access music education. But Marcus himself would say the real story was simpler. It was about a man who'd lost his way and a woman who'd helped him find it again through the universal language of music. It was about remembering where you came from and honoring those who came before. It was about the courage to change and the grace to accept love when it finally arrived. And every year, on the anniversary of the night they met, Marcus and Rachel would return to that ballroom at the Waldorf. They'd fill it with children and music, and Rachel would play her grandmother's piece on that expensive piano. Every year, the melody was a little different, evolving as their life together evolved, adding new notes of joy and challenge and growth. The billionaire had laughed at his own challenge, never believing anyone could truly move him. But the Jewish woman with her grandmother's music had done more than win a challenge. She'd opened a door in his heart that he'd thought was permanently closed. She'd shown him that the richest life wasn't about money or status or possessions. It was about connection, purpose, and love. And every time Marcus heard that piano play, every time he watched another child discover the joy of music, He remembered the gift Rachel had given him that first night. Not just her love, though that was precious, but the reminder that he was still capable of being moved, still capable of feeling, still capable of becoming something better than he'd been. In the end, it wasn't the billionaire who'd won. It was both of them, finding in each other what they'd been missing all along.